Brothers and sisters, when we live in a community, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to ensure that there is peace and love within a community, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us certain guidelines. But it is the nature of the human being, no matter how many guidelines come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is the nature of the human being that when we are surrounded by others, we're going to be surrounded not only by others, but we're going to know a lot about what goes on in the life of others. We're going to see at times the success or the failure of people around us. One thing that destroys us, one thing that can destroy our community and can destroy our families, can destroy our happiness, can destroy the peace in our life, was the very first sin that was committed. Especially in the case of Adam alayhi salam and Iblis. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Iblis, and He told all the malaika, in fact, that make sajda to Adam alayhi salam. وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Iblis was the only one who said, I will not make sajda. He defied the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't want to talk about the story of Adam and Iblis, but I want to talk about what caused Iblis to be in this situation. What was that sin that he committed? It was arrogance, no doubt. But why was it arrogance? The arrogance was a byproduct of something else, which happens to also be the root cause of the very first sin that was committed on the face of this earth. And that sin and that sickness and that disease of the heart that I'm referring to is hasad, or envy. Brothers and sisters, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he has told us in a hadith, in order to ensure our happiness, he says, لا تباغضوا ولا تحاسدوا ولا تدابروا ولا تقاطعوا وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. Things that can easily happen within us. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is warning us from now, from that time, he's warning us that make sure you don't fall into these sins. Do not harbor any grudge towards each other. Do not be jealous of one another. وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا. Do not cause enmity or do not create enemies amongst yourselves. وَلَا تَقَاطَعُوا. And do not show your backs to each other, especially in the times of distress and in the time when a person needs our aid and our assistance. That is not a time that we turn our backs to each other. And then he says, وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا. That be brothers towards one another. The reason why, again in this hadith, Rasulullah ﷺ is talking about hasad, because hasad has that ability to create that hatred within ourselves. Hasad, brothers and sisters, and that jealousy is what caused shaitan to be dismissed from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a person has hasad, they will be deprived from the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hasad is what caused Qabil to kill Habil. This was the very first crime on the face of this earth. But hasad was the issue behind the whole story. And this is why Qabil killed Habil. Hasad is what caused the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam to throw their young brother in a situation where they have no heart, no feelings, no empathy, no sympathy for their young brother Yusuf alayhi salam. But hasad led them to throw Yusuf alayhi salam into a well and show him no mercy. Hasad is what caused the Yahud at the time of the Prophet ﷺ and the Quraysh to reject the message of the Prophet ﷺ. Hasad is what caused Abdullah bin Ubay to dissent and to cause dissent within the Muslim community. It caused him that every moment that he would find to try to break up the Muslim community, hasad would lead him to try to find any situation to break up the Muslim community. Brothers and sisters, hasad is that one thing that, as I said earlier, it will break a person apart. It is considered as, another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it is considered as the diseases of the nation. As the Prophet ﷺ says, the illness of those nations before you was two things. It was jealousy towards each other, and it was enmity and hatred towards each other. Not only that, but think about this. No matter how much Quran you and I recite, all the salawat, the salat that you and I we perform, whether it is the fara'id or the nawafil or the witr, all the fasting that we do, all the dhikr that we do, there is one thing that the Prophet ﷺ says that will destroy all the khair, all the good that we do, and that is hasad. When a person is jealous towards each other and then they act upon that jealousy. See, one thing needs to be very clear. There are things that are part of the human emotion, the human nature. That is not what is wrong. But when we act upon that, for example, a person can become angry. Yes, anger is part of who we are as human beings. But most people, they act upon that anger and they cross the limits. Yes, we're human beings. Yes, we want more and more. But when we see other people and their success, and yes, jealousy will come into our heart. But if we act upon the jealousy and we become a victim of our own jealousy, and the jealousy overpowers us, it overcomes us, and it controls us, this is where the problem is. The jealousy in itself is not the issue, but often when a person does become jealous, they are crossing the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as I said, that there's one thing that eats up all the good deeds, brothers and sisters. This is a point of concern for all of us. No matter how much good we're doing, but on the back end, if we're doing things, and if I'm showing jealousy towards others, it will wipe away all my good deeds. Jealousy destroys a person. It destroys and eliminates any happiness that you may find in life. Why? Because your focus is always someone else. Wallahi, jealousy will take away any happiness in your life. No matter how many blessings will come from Allah, when a person is engaged in jealousy, they will never find happiness. Jealousy will remove the peace of your mind. Why? Because you're constantly thinking about someone else. And when a person is constantly consumed because of someone else or because of someone else's success, in this case, it begins to affect their family. They do not want to be around their family. They don't find any happiness in their family. And not only that, but because a person becomes jealous and then they start to say things that are considered as wrong, that are considered as sin. They start to say derogatory things regarding Allah and Islam. Then in that situation, that becomes ungratefulness. So what happens is that a person, when he falls into hasad and he becomes a victim of their hasad, then not only are they losing their happiness, they're losing their sleep over this, but at the same time, because of their ungratefulness, Allah begins to take away from them. And so what happens is, a person sees another person and their success, and Allah begins to take away from them, and it grows in their hatred, and it grows even more within them. That is why, brothers and sisters, if we are going through something like this, yes, we will always feel that someone else has something more than us. And this is the reality of life. There's always going to be someone who has more than us. When it comes to wealth, there's going to be someone who has more than us. When it comes to richness of this dunya, there are going to be people who have more than us. When it comes to the akhirah, there are going to be people who have more than us. When it comes to knowledge, there will be people who have more than us. This is a reality of dunya. But at the same time, jealousy in that hasad that I'm referring to is not that a person says, I want the same thing, but it's the fact that when a person says, I want this person to be deprived from that khair, from that good, from that happiness at all costs, whether I get it or not. And not only that, but even if they get the news that there is some kind of difficulty in their life, then they rejoice and they are happy at that bad news. When they see that the person who they're jealous about, there is some kind of bad news in their family or bad news in their life, they rejoice internally. This is a sign of hasad, and this is the danger of hasad, that it eats you inside. Wallahi, you're left with no soul, no spirituality, no happiness, and no peace in our life. This is the dangers of hasad. At the same time, the question is, what causes a person to have hasad towards others? What are the leading factors? Of course, there are many things I can share with you. So we talked about the dangers of hasad and how hasad has affected people. But at the same time, what are the causes? Number one is being unthankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever we have, wallahi, brothers and sisters, if we just take a moment and reflect on what we have. There are people who have come to me and told me about the challenges in their life. Right now, just recently, because of the storms throughout this entire week, there are many of us who probably experienced our electricity being cut off. The electricity went out. Some of us went through almost an entire day, and we went through difficulty. And yes, there will be some kind of frustration. You're living in the same subdivision, some have, some don't have. You're looking at others have, you don't have. But in a situation like that, what should a person do? Still, if you reflect on how much Allah has given us, wallahi, it is much more than what millions and millions of people they have. I've been to places on the face of this earth, brothers and sisters, where I stayed there for 1 week and they only had electricity for 1 hour in the entire week. I've been to those kind of places on the face of this earth. And here we're complaining. Yes, there is some frustration, but in a situation like this, we always remind ourselves that there is so much more to be thankful about to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Are we going through what our brothers and sisters in Gaza are going through? Wallahi, is not even close to what our brothers and sisters in Gaza are going through. They have no idea whether their food is coming or there's a bomb coming right upon them. We saw the pictures from Rafah. What do we have to complain about, brothers and sisters? Wallahi, the more we are thankful, the less it is. Living here in America, we have nothing to complain about. Am I saying that there are no challenges? Yes, there are challenges. But wallahi, we need to learn how to be thankful. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If we are thankful to Allah, Allah will increase. But yet we think that the more we complain, the more we are complaining about others and their success and what we don't have and so forth is going to perhaps bring some kind of remedy to our life. It's not bringing any kind of solutions to our life, but rather we are putting ourselves in a situation that whatever good that we have, whatever blessings we have, Allah will take that away from us. When we see others having blessings, when we see others having things that we don't have, this causes jealousy. In a situation like that, we need to learn how to be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You may look at a person who has a huge mansion, and you might be living in a 3-bedroom apartment. But this is still better when you go to people around the city. There are people living on the streets, living in the tents, don't know where their next meal is going to come from. And yet I'm complaining because I see another person living in a mansion. I see another person who just bought a brand new car. But I have a car and it's functional. It gets me from point A to point B. But why not reflect on those who don't even have a car? Wallahi, there are so many thousands, our Muslim brothers and sisters, who are struggling financially and they don't even have a vehicle to get them from point A to point B. But yet here we are showing our unthankfulness and our ingratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, one of the things that leads a person to be jealous about others is being unthankful to Allah. Number 2, arrogance. Just like I shared in the case of Adam and Iblis, Adam alayhi salam and Iblis, that he had this arrogance. What led him to defy the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It was his arrogance. And that arrogance was because of that envy and that hasad that was in the heart of shaitan. that hasad is speaking out in the form of takabbur. When he says, أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْ, I am better than him. خَلَقَتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقَتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. This is arrogance, but that arrogance was a byproduct of the hasad that he had in his heart for Adam alayhi salam. When a person is arrogant, because arrogance means what? As the Prophet ﷺ says, بَطَرُ الْحَقِّ وَغَمْتُ النَّاسِ, is to suppress the truth and feel that others are inferior to you. The very first steps of hasad is a person is arrogant towards others. Number 3, not being content with the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah has given someone else, I need to learn that this is through the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I want the same thing, yes, I should ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we show our hasad, and hasad comes out in many forms. Sometimes verbally we will express that hasad. Sometimes physically we will express that hasad. But what we're doing is, brothers and sisters, we are showing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are not happy with the qadr that He has created for us. And that's a serious crime. That is showing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah perhaps does not know what He's doing. As a Muslim, when I say that آمنت بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر والقدر خيره وشره من الله تعالى, all the qadr, good or bad, it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to learn how to be satisfied with the decision and the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another interesting thing, another thing that leads a person towards hasad is, I said this very briefly before, but comparing yourself to others. This happens often within a community. And I'll say this, brothers and sisters. Yes, we've always been taught, compare, compete. When we were growing up as kids, even now till today, we're always teaching our kids to compare your success to the success of others. Compete with others. This is how we push ourselves. This is how we were pushed when we were kids, many of us here, and this is how we are pushing our kids further ahead. But at the same time, when it becomes that I'm comparing myself to others, and it's growing hasad in me. See, one is that you want to compare yourself, you want to push yourself. You see someone who is gaining some kind of success in this dunya, you look at them and you say, you know what, that is motivation for me. I'm going to push myself. That's not hasad. Hasad is when you compare yourself to others, that why do I have this and why do they have that? Why don't I have this and why do they have that? When we compare ourselves with others, and especially in a situation like this dunya, we should never compare ourselves to people who have more than us, but rather we compare ourselves to those who don't have anything. And the last thing that causes hasad, especially within families, is when we discriminate amongst our children. This creates hasad within the children, by the way. What causes, I've seen so many families where siblings don't want to talk to each other. Siblings don't want to look at each other when they grow up. And if you look at the reason, the root reason of why this has caused, what has caused these children or these adults now, that they are acting with each other in this way. They're siblings towards each other, but they don't want to look at each other. Why? Because there was some kind of hasad that was built in their hearts when they were kids. Why? Because the parents were discriminating against the children. The parents were giving superiority to one over the other. Now let me make this very clear. I'm not talking about all general cases. Yes, generally speaking, we as parents, all parents, should learn that when we make rules for one, we cannot leave the other one, let them do whatever they want to do. This happens often within our families. I've given many khutbahs, many lectures about this, that when we discriminate against our children, boys can come 3 o'clock in the morning, girls cannot go home, cannot leave the home after Maghrib. This is wrong. You understand? And your kids are not Jibreel alayhi salam, they're not Imam Bukhari. Okay, this idea that my kids are amazing, okay? I've heard this so many times, I don't believe in it. I'm sorry to say, okay? Yes, you have given some kind of tarbiyah to your children, and your children may be good, but shaitan is always around them too. Keep that in mind, okay? So when people tell me that mere bachche se acha koi nahi hai, okay? Out. Okay? I'm not going to listen to that, honestly, okay? You need to, as parents, You need to learn how to be fair amongst your children. Yes, there might be different circumstances in a family. There might be some families that have disabled children, children who are special needs, children who are required. They need a little more attention. Physically, they might be, not as where others are. Intellectually, they might not be where others are. You might have to give them a little more attention. But we're generally speaking, we need to learn how to create standard set rules for all of our children. Otherwise, it will create discrimination and it will cause hasad. The next thing is, how do we generally invite hasad towards ourselves? How do we generally invite hasad towards ourselves? I'm just going to share one thing. This is a big problem, and that's why I'm going to share one thing. When we showcase our blessings of Allah on social media especially, when Yaqub alayhi salam is telling Yusuf alayhi salam, don't go and tell your brothers what you saw in that dream, because they will know the meaning of that dream and you're putting yourselves in harm's way. Yet everyone feels this need. I have had people call me in my life, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on, this is going on. And I ask them, what's their social media activity like? I put everything on social media. That's your problem. When you showcase your blessings on social media, you're not telling the world about your kids' accomplishments and your accomplishments. You're giving others the ability to be a hasad and to show hasad towards you. And remember, hasad does not stop at hasad. Hasad leads to then evil eye. It leads to nazar. From there it leads to hatred. From there it leads to harming someone else. And from there, in many cases, it leads to black magic. There are a lot of cases within our own Muslim community where people are performing black magic and sihr against others. What is the root cause of all of it? It is hasad. They are hasad and they feel like there's nothing I can do to harm that person but to do shirk with Allah and to do kufr with Allah, and they're willing to cross all those boundaries. Why? Because they cannot see someone else happy. This is what hasad does to a person. Finally, how can we treat hasad? Number one is being thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always focus on what we have, do not focus on what we don't have. Number two is, as talked about parents and family, we need to learn how to be equally fair to all of our children. I'm not saying equally 50%. There's going to be a little here and there, I understand. But if there are some major changes and major rule adjustments and we're being unfair, trust me, you as a parent, you might want your children to be united when they grow up, but they will not be united if you are doing this right now with your family. These kids will grow up hating each other and not want to see each other. And the last thing I will say is there are some du'as from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we learn. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامة من كل شيطان وهامة من كل عين لامة. This is a dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Also, we learn from the sunnah in the seerah of the Prophet to recite Surah Al-Falaq and Surah Al-Nas. Surah Al-Falaq talks about external evils, protection from external evils. Surah Al-Nas talks about protection from internal evils. الَّذِي يُوَسْوِسُ فِي صُدُورِ النَّاسِ. So internal evils, external evils, these are things that we must do every day. And not only that, but we teach our children. See, parents, a lot of times, they will recite the dua and they will blow on their children. No, you recite it, make your children recite it separately. These are the things that we can do to protect ourselves from hasad. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from hasad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from falling into hasad. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and our families. Ameen Rabbil Alameen.